Welcome back to Beneath It All in the African American Community, Episode 4, Part 2.
We have been ripped of our pride, and now we need to take it back. And one of the ways of taking it back is investing in our community and making sure that we own our property and making sure that we support each other's businesses, because all it does is bring more value to our communities.
Well, I mean, investing in ourselves first through education.
Yes.
When I say education, I don't mean formal education. I mean spending time reading about real estate, learning about stocks and bonds, learning about banking, learning about zoning. Because I mean, it's a good thing you pay your taxes, but you gotta learn to challenge the tax man. Because here's what happens in some Black communities, especially in South Carolina and Jacksonville. You got a Black beach there that's been having little issues.
American Beach,
exactly.
Yes.
What they do, and this is where government gets corrupted, what they do, they jack up your assessments. So a senior African-American couple, retired, can't pay those taxes no more, they got to sell, because sometimes old money has grand plans. 20 years from now, we want to have our hotels and resorts there. So our parents may die, but their kids know what the grand plan is. So that old person may die, but the sons and grandsons know that one day they want to control American Beach. And so they get people elected, and those people keep jacking up the taxes for American Beach. Eventually, those are African Americans who were not filthy rich, they just were born and raised there, and they have a blue-collar job, can't pay the taxes, they get bought out. And so over time, they make this like step by step, they keep collecting property, and eventually, they can kick you out. Now, one thing has changed about 10 years ago where eminent domain, I mean, Black folks are scared of that word, because eminent domain used to be one of the things they can just come in and take over the whole Black community and just wipe you out. And they can still do it, but it has to be for a government purpose. But in 1998, 99, they wiped out a whole part of, I think it's New Haven, Connecticut. They were going to bring in this big company by the waterfront, and they did it to white folks. So, and they got upset and went to Supreme Court. And so now you can't do eminent domain for private purposes, like for a developer or for a company, which was popular back in the day. And now you can do it for a government purpose, which means, a federal highway, or the most favorite in most cities, which is the worst, because it's for government utility projects. Now, you look in the Black community, where are all the sewer pumps, where you drive to and it smells at night, in the Black community, because the government does that. That would never happen in one of your fancy golf course communities, but they'll find the Black community, and that's where they'll put it, because zoning allows them to do that. And they can come and tell you they want 4 or 5 properties and kick you out, because the law allows them to do that. But I'm saying over time, places like American Beach are threatened. There's a couple places in South Carolina that has Black families by the Gullas. All the areas are threatened because they're prime property where Black folks have lived for generations, but some white folks got their eyes on it. And, they're hoping 20, 30 years from now, they can control it. And so if people in those areas know that, they can start making sure that the laws put in place that will protect them through historic preservation, so you say, this again, you gotta learn to play the rules the way they play. And then you gotta come back at them at the rules they made. So historic preservation is a way to keep your property preserved for generations if you live in a historic community. You can't touch it, but that's federal law. But again, that's planning and zoning. So you gotta learn to play the rules before you can play the game. And then when you learn the rules, and because the rules change, you gotta keep up to date.
correct. Well, my question is, how do you learn how to play the game? I mean, how do you learn the rules? And the reason why I state this, my mom was from the Caribbean and my dad was born here in America. He was a Midwesterner. One of the key differences between the two was they had difference in perspective and in view, in culture. And my mom was very, set on ownership, home ownership. But my mom didn't really have a clear understanding of how to begin getting started with that. So and she encouraged me to buy a home. Now, I started out in social work, so I was doing some community work and was part of Acorn, and started to have some understanding of community work, community development. It was still pretty sketchy. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, but it started to make some sense, because what I would do is I would listen to the arguments for and against. So the arguments would send me in a direction to start researching to understand, why is this group opposed and why is this group for it? That would eventually help me to understand what is the dynamic going on. So Mayor Dinkins was in New York City, was the mayor at the time, and they came up with the partnership housing program. And during the 1977, there were a number of owners who were burning their homes for the insurance plan. So there are a lot of vacant lots in New York City and in the Brooklyn area. So they were developing these 2-family homes. So many people were excited because they were to be affordable homes. I was just 24 years old when my mom came to me, and I probably was making $23,000 a year in my first job. And, please, do it for us, because my mom was, she had Social Security disability, and she could not own a home because she would lose her Social Security. So, it's this catch, whichever way you went, you were going to lose. So I said, of course, because I wanted my mom to have a home, right? So I put my name on the deed and became a home owner at 24 with no money. Absolute everything that I had, that I'd saved to move out and get an apartment as a young adult woman, was exhausted. And then I exhausted all my credit cards to actually, because at that point, did not really understand everything I was getting into, though I was trying to read. Went to my family, went to other people. No one seemed to understand to give me the guidance. Is this the right decision? Because one of the things in my gut is I wanted to purchase. I said, if we're going to do this and have no money, why don't we purchase in the community that I went to school, which is now Clinton Hill, which is now completely, the housing, the cost of houses there are outrageous. But my family didn't want to wait a year or a year and probably a half a year to a year for me to save enough money for a down payment, because the difference between the homes was $148,000 for the down payment versus $250,000. So I needed down payment 10 to 20% of either. So I went with the home that my mother wanted to get, but they were built, they were substandard the way that they were built. The sewer line was smaller. And one of the key things that I didn't understand is that there was a first mortgage that belonged to the city. I was actually locked into that home for the first 15 years after purchase. So I'm 24, which means I cannot sell the home, move, take care of my life, and you must stay there. You, the owner, must remain in that household for the 15-year period. That is what I didn't understand. No matter how much I tried to sift through the contracts, I just did not get. Although I had an African-American lawyer, none of this came true to me. It was just, something's not right about it. But of course, at the same time, trying to please family and making sure that they were safe, because we were living in an apartment when I had with the purchase, and it wasn't until afterwards. And then we had a class action suit against the developers because of the poor construction. And only some of us, were able to get some payout, not all of us. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I was finally able to have some kind of, I think I was able to refinance, because I was in so much debt between school, graduate school, just keeping up with the house, the taxes, that by the time I was, able to get money out of it, it paid for all the debt that I was in. But refinancing wasn't the best option either. Mm-hmm. It took about 20 years altogether for the house to really have some worth and value. But by the time that happened, of course, trying to live my life and move elsewhere, I rented. And in that particular area, and what was interesting, there were certain there was sale companies that would not sell in that neighborhood. The more high-end companies would not come in. So you had folks selling homes, and homes would be you know, I rented my house and I had tenants that wouldn't move or wouldn't pay rent and then wouldn't move. And I had been in court probably 4 times. So by the time I get through all the court deals and folks are finally out, I'm in arrears several thousands of dollars and I can't recover the house. So the issue then becomes, do I, you know, refinancing, not refinancing, because I wasn't eligible for refinancing. It then becomes short sale or sale. So it was through the whole process of many, many years, you really don't, it's really difficult to get a grasp of everything that's associated with a purchase, managing, and understanding the value of home ownership. And that was the greatest difference. But coming from the Caribbean, this is what we did. You know, this is what the family was taught. It was the first thing that was taught, is that you needed to own. It was just that my family didn't have enough background or understanding of all that was entailed, and left me to figure it out. And the information for me, it wasn't that it wasn't there. I didn't know how to begin sifting through it. I do now, but I didn't know then. But I had to wind up selling my home because I made a choice not to destroy my credit, not to short sale, or not to go bankrupt, and with the hopes of purchasing again. But of course, by now, though I'm in a much higher tax bracket than when I started out, it's you're priced out, because you're completely priced out. And there's been a lot of gentrification in the areas that I live in. And what's interesting is that those those African Americans who own businesses, their taxes, they lost their businesses because the way that it was calculated, their taxes were much higher because they were like rezoned or recalculated, and whatever they thought they owned quadruple. So they wound up losing their businesses. So it's been very distressing to see the changes. But what has been very challenging, both in terms of a perspective of mental health, for African Americans, and in terms of economic power and decision making, is the loss of power. It's like, how do you regain it? How do you maintain it? You know, and a lot of folks sold because they were getting checks for $1 million, not understanding that their house value would be $2 million in 6 months to a year, not really understanding these things. So there's been, and it was a time, believe it or not, in this neighborhood where they were giving these houses away through a lottery. The same houses that cost $2 million, they were giving away in a lottery because many of them were abandoned because of, mismanagement, substance use in the area. So there's been a dramatic change here, but many African Americans are completely priced out. If not by home ownership, now by renting. You can't afford to rent in certain neighborhoods within Brooklyn. So it's if you can speak to, like, how do you begin sifting through the enormous amount of information for someone today wanting to understand what is my best option, even with minimal funds or with minimal, I don't have a lot of options. What is the best step I can take to begin understanding this very complex issue?
Real estate acquisition is very complex, and you're right. Owning a home is a big step. Whereby in the Caribbean, where I come from, too, it's, your family, if you have a piece of property, you build a house, you set. Here in this country, real estate is also where you can be taken advantage of, and not only by the private sector, but by your local government. Because I've seen government in cahoots with the developer to make money because they want to make the neighborhood better. What they don't tell you is once you're locked in, you got to pay taxes, and I tell people, a renter versus a homeowner, there's a huge mind shift that has to happen, whereby you're a renter, the bathroom's plugged up, the pipes don't work, you make one phone call, stuff gets done. When you're a homeowner, you make those calls and you pay out of your pocket. It's a whole different, and so one city where I worked in Florida, they put some block grant funds into an old apartment complex. They sold it to the people, African Americans, low income. You can own your own condo, and within 2 years, we had to kick those people out. I came in when they were kicking them out into the city, and it was one of the worst feelings of my career to see a lot of families being kicked out because they had not paid the rent in 2 years, and people had left There were waters running through the pipes on the floors of the building. There was wires exposed with kids around. And so the same city who set it up 2 or 3 years now was not kicking people out. And then so that not that they got a bankruptcy or foreclosure on their record. It was one of the worst things that I had to go through my career, because legally they couldn't stay there because the building the water was turned off, the power was turned off. They didn't understand the concept of home ownership, number one. They didn't understand how to live in a condo, number two. Where you got to pay the bill because certain common areas has to be taken care of. So I've seen cities with great ideas don't educate people the right way, because they've got the mayor or whoever's running for office has a goal, they're gonna get it done, and they force it through, and they don't spend time educating people the value or what home ownership entails. And it is a process, because in Florida, which is famous for this, is we build all these subdivisions real quick, and we get people in, and everybody makes money, and then you're left paying the mortgage, but on all the other fees, because think about the attorneys, the mortgage company, the banks, the appraiser, the title company. There's so much people in the process that makes a lot of money in that process, and you sign like 20 pages, because end of the day you're gonna pay for all those fees that people made as part of your mortgage. That's how it works. I think for us, we need to educate ourselves better. Banks have home ownership classes. There are nonprofits in other communities that have home ownership classes where you got to go through certain banks. If you go through the course, you get a discount on your fees or points. And so it's upon us really to learn the process, because people who are trying to sell their house don't care. They may tell you they care, but they're trying to get you to sign those paperwork, those 20 pages. Because once you sign, you got 3 days by law to opt out. But then who's going to want to opt out after going through all that? And so they're supposed to make sure you have a good credit, or they do decent credit, have a job, and all that stuff. But I can tell you when the market tanked in Florida, I was in Florida in 2007 or 8 or 9, and I tell you when it tanked in Florida, I knew people who had signed up for 5 homes, and they were just going to closings and getting a check for 50 grand, 100 grand, and they became multimillionaires just putting the money on a note and walking away and selling to somebody else. They didn't have work a day in their life except collect a check for 2 years, and the kids, they were pretty much, excuse my friends, sticking it to the homeowner. And that's what they were doing. And the laws allow them to do that. Now they have tightened some things along the way, but still, if you're looking to buy a house or buying a car, you got to educate yourself. Ask family members, ask friends, or go on the internet, read, go to the library, read, because and ask questions. Ask a lot of questions, because you're in the hook for it. So it's your money. So ask a lot of questions. But I must say it's gotten better, but it's still up to you to do your homework. A lot of communities have nonprofits, whether through the churches, so some may have it, or there's certain nonprofits that do housing development, and so they will usually take their time with you for most part, because they're there to stay, they're part of the community, so they're there long term. But I would just say I would encourage anybody, do your homework, ask questions, talk to people who bought homes. They'll tell you the process. They'll tell you what they went through. I mean, that's one of the best ways. You got family members or friends who bought homes. Ask them what they did and what was the process, because that's how you learn some of the things you won't learn in the book. That they don't tell you in the book. Somebody will tell you, well, yeah, they had me sign this, and I couldn't leave for 10 years, because some programs tie you to a home, whether it's 5, 10, 20 years. You can't sell, and if you do sell, you got to pay back their portion, so you don't even make money, because you have a second lien on the property, whereby if they gave you 20 grand as down payment, when you sell, the first 20 is theirs. So you may sell and walk away and not making any money. So
right, it was 50 cents on the dollar.
Exactly.
So for every dollar over the initial mortgage, which was 148, that say I wanted to sell the house for 250,000, that balance, which was about $98,000, I would have to give half to the city.
Yeah. And so there goes your wealth. All the hard-earned money you put in, all the time you put in, because and you don't even see the money. You get the portion sent back to you. So you didn't even see it. You see it in a piece of paper when you get to get your portion. Yeah.
No, that's very correct, because even when I sold, I had assumed that the 15-year period had passed, and I think I refinanced shy of 3 months and still had to pay, I think, $9,000 taxes because of that error. So you have to approach it as a business, meaning you're building your own business and all the nuances associated with developing a business as an entrepreneur. You really want to know everything associated with it so that you can make the best informed decision and take advantage of all the classes, take advantage. I agree, speaking with folks who've owned, and it's you have to just really understand, especially if you're owning a 2-family as opposed to a 1-family home or multi-dwelling, what it is, what are the rules in your state regarding renters, if renters don't pay, if they default, when and how do you act?
Lock the door or go there with a baseball bat.
Because you can't. And if something goes, one of the things that was very stressful in terms of my mental wellness is because you're still responsible for the house even if they're not paying rent. So you still are responsible for providing heat, for whatever is in your for heat, water, and you still have to pay for water, gas, and heat, and you can't turn it off. And it was just very distressful. And you'll have water bills that's $2,000. You'll have gas bills that's $1,500. It was just outrageous, and you're required to.
The new family's living below you, so
yes, and you still have to. And if there are repairs that would cause harm or what's expected, you're still required to do them. So it's really important. And in New York City, the biggest issue is to avoid homelessness. So they're very slow in addressing rental issues. So of course with COVID, and they're relaxing. Owners can't put people out if they don't pay their rent. There are a number of owners now that are in a lot of trouble because of that. They're just in a lot of trouble. They're in terms of maintaining their homes, and because they're still responsible, as you said, Mr. Hulse, that they're still responsible for those bills, regardless whether or not they're receiving a rental payment during COVID. So it is imperative. And I think it's very distressing. I think it's all part of it's very secular. It's all part of it. The whole redlining, everything it's part of a whole systemic process that has taken place. And part of it is the miseducation or the lack of education. It's just not available. And they leave it to folks to try and figure it out. They know that they can't completely omit it. We're not part of certain conversations. So like you're right, by the time we become part of a conversation, the decision was made 2 years ago. And now we're just becoming part of it. So there are things that we don't know. It's not presented as something that's entertaining or interesting. It's overwhelming. It's designed to keep you outside the perimeter. It's just designed that way. And you have to make a informed decision to say, regardless of what I'm going to combat, I'm going to push through and get a hold of this information, learn it, and master it to the best of my ability, and just continue to ask questions. And every time a question comes up, that you jot it down until you have that answer where you can check it off and say, now I'm clear about that. And it's very complex. And any economic issue, especially involving home ownership, you really just prepare your mind that it's going to take a lot of work, and you want to make sure that you have allies at your disposal that will help you through that process.
Yeah, because it sounds like you have to really educate yourself, because one of the things that you brought up, Mr. Hulse, is asking people who've already purchased homes. The thing that I find in the African American community is that people who have purchased homes, they really don't have an answer for you. You know why they don't have an answer? Because they too just signed on the dotted line and didn't understand what they were doing. My parents' house have been paid for 3 times, like literally. Like it was paid off. They, got a loan to buy this, and then that paid off, and then they got a loan, and just constantly, because that's how they saw it. They didn't have money. And so now they've had 3 mortgages on the one house that was paid off long before, and they never understood it. The same way people don't understand that when you have property, and I think this is where you come and educate yourself. Because Mr. Hulse, you and I are gonna have to talk again, because you're right, I'm gonna have to do more than pay those taxes. I need to educate myself, so thank you. This is what happened too with people who own properties, especially African Americans, is they don't understand the upkeep of that property. And so little things like a bunch of cars on the property and junk, it brings the value down. And if you have too many of those in the community, of course, the community value goes down. And so if you don't understand that, then you just continue to do it. And now, of course, they just come in and they just take whatever they need to take because you're not keeping it up anyway. This is why we have this old saying, you all know it, and I'm real. When a Black person comes to the community, they go, uh-oh, it's time for us to move. Because that's the idea, is that we don't know how to keep up that property and we're gonna bring it down. And that is, again, because we haven't been taught. But it's important that you learn. I'm just thankful that over the years, I've learned certain things in talking with different people. And I think that's the issue, is that a lot of family members really don't know. And so asking them, they just go, just sign the dotted line. But what you signing?
And those are great community conversations, because it's something the family has not been a homeowner ever, and they don't understand the process. And that's where you got to go to the community, people in the community, at a church or friends, or you got to reach out and ask questions. The person may not be of color. You got your non-African American friends, reach out and ask questions. Especially if they're buying up a lot of property, you want to. Well, by the way, how do you guys do that? Because you want to know. I want to be part of that league too. So you don't be afraid, don't be ashamed to ask the question. So sometimes you got to be a little selfless and bite the humble pie and ask the question. I've learned some things that way. It's like I see people doing certain things, like, okay, how I'm making as much money as they are, so how do they do that? I want to know, because I want to be able to get to that point and do the same that they're doing. And you ask the question, like, okay. Now I know how to do that. So sometimes it's just eating the humble pie and ask the right question, because you're right. There's a lot of things that happens around the Black community, and if half of us knew how to do it, we'd be much better positioned. I was talking to one of my friends yesterday at work, and we were having lunch. Social distance, we're having lunch, and we're talking about, the African American population in this country is about more or less 10, 12 million people. But then we spend over $30 billion a year in telecommunications. So the question is, we own the phone companies? We own the internet companies? So, because we're making a lot of people rich off telecommunications. So we're like, how do we tap into that industry? Because, there's a lot of money to be made there. Because this country is roughly 250 million people. We're about 10 or so. But we, out of that, 100 billion, we're about 30. So we're using a lot of that bandwidth, but are we making the money off that bandwidth? That's a question to ask.
Right.
So.
We definitely need to start having some conversations in our community about how do we establish or obtain our wealth back within our communities. Definitely have to start having conversations like that and understanding the importance of property ownership. I know my husband and I, we recently purchased an old house built in the 18-something, and they used to actually have civil rights meeting there here in Jacksonville, and it's just been sitting there. And I remember this house, I used to pass it all the time, and bought it from some old people who just couldn't take care of it. $4,000, like literally $4,000. And my husband was like, no, this property is just too run down. I'm like, baby, you can't buy a piece of property for $4,000 anywhere. Like, forget it. And it has a house on it. So, of course, we bought the property, fixed it up. It's now our rental property. And now the property is worth like 30-something thousand. And if we continue to do things and help fix up the community, of course, because they're doing gentrification in these communities, then the value continues to go up. And again, we always have investors, Caucasian investors saying, look, I really want to buy this house. And so just having those conversations that say, look, if it takes buying a piece of property in our community that has been sitting there for years, abandoned, and taking our time and fixing it up and bringing back up the value of our community, and why can't we do it? And I think as a people, if we start to learn how to work together and unify, and that's the key, unifying, then maybe we won't have to really go around the third person and go to these banks who, by the way, is going to give us a higher interest rate. And so, banks are great. I love them and I use them. But if we can, if all possible, as a people, learn how to come together and say, how do we put our resources together and start making sure that our community is, once again built up, so we can take that pride back, so we can take that value back that we had before entering into the U.S. Can I just say that? We have to do something, and we have to start, you're right, getting the right people in office, because it's who's in charge, who has all the power, and they're making it harder for us. Like, we have higher interest rates and everything, and our mortgage, all of that. And so educating yourself is the key, and being able to advocate for yourself when you're sitting at the table and realizing this. That becomes key, because if we don't do something immediately and learn, then we continue all of these distresses that we experience as African Americans, mentally and physically. And so we have to start doing something and start somewhere.
By educating yourself, you can ask the right questions, and because you don't ask the right questions, you won't get the answers. And even after you ask the right question, you also something got to probe deep, because you're getting the answer that they think you want to hear. It's like, nah, that's not the truth. I need to know how they got it, because I got the same credit score or better. I'm putting it on a higher down payment, so I want what they got or better.
Right.
So sometimes, you gotta push back, and not just because they're giving it to you. Oh, and they're giving me this great deal. Well, it's the best deal I got. I'm not looking for a great deal, so I ask the question. So I don't like to give away my money. So, and I think one of the things Dr. Edwardson brought up earlier, real estate is complex, so it's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to be a homeowner. It's a great thing if you can, but a simple way to create wealth is when you go to work, especially work for a large company or corporation or government, school board or whatever, they have this thing called a pension plan. You need to educate yourself about stocks and bonds and mutual funds. That's a very simple way to get into business, because if you start when you're 20 and you're 50, you could be a millionaire. You can do it right. Mm-hmm. You can't, and I tell people, people in the Black community, we're known as great consumers. They love us. That's why they show us on all the cigarettes and the whiskeys and all the stuff we consume, the cell phones. But do we buy cell phone stocks? Do we buy stocks in the whiskey company and mutual fund? If you're going to use it, make some money off it.
If you're a professional who would like to be on the show, or an individual who has struggled with mental health and would like to be a guest, email us at info@intake.tv.
Follow us on all of our social media platforms.
Intake Talk Show, making mental health a priority by changing the way the world views it. To learn more about Intake or one of our guests, visit our website at intake.tv.